Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of 21st Century Spielberg. I'm Chris Evangelista, a staff writer and critic with slashfilm.com. And when it comes to 21st Century Spielberg, the main episodes may be a one-man show, but for these bonus episodes, I wanted to bring in some guests. And with me today to discuss AI and Minority Report is Liz Shannon Miller. Liz, tell the folks at home about yourself and where they can find you and all that jazz.
I'm a freelance writer right now, writing for a number of different places, including Vulture, Variety, the AV Club, etc. Fewer and fewer places sometimes as time goes on, but hopefully things bounce back relatively soon. It's funny because I primarily cover TV, but I love getting the chance to talk about film, especially films like these, which I've seen over and over again for some reason or another over the years.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on Steven Spielberg in general as a whole? Not just, his films of the 21st century, but all, his entire body of work.
Well, I feel like he's one of those filmmakers where you can almost kind of take for granted just how good he is. Like it's one of those things where it's just like, you watch his films and there's such confidence to them. It's kind of like those gymnasts who make it look easy, and the reason they make it look easy is because of thousands of hours of practice. So, I mean, he's, I kind of was joking about how I've watched these movies over and over again for some reason. But the thing about the reason I've rewatched them over and over again is Spielberg as a filmmaker is never boring and is always trying interesting things. And it's fascinating to go back and re-examine them.
Yeah, for sure. And, Steven Spielberg, he's had a very successful career. I mean, right from the jump, really. And the weird thing is, no matter how successful he's been, he always had this sort of fear of illegitimacy. And there's something kind of comforting in that like the most successful filmmaker of all time has imposter syndrome sometime, but he really cares about, not just success and, the money. He really cares about being seen as an artist. And in 1993, there was sort of like this sea change because that's when he released both Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. And that was also finally when he cleaned up at the Oscars, something he'd been, dying to do all his career. And it sort of like flipped a switch in his mind that, he wanted to make these movies now that were, important movies, movies like Schindler's List, but he also still wanted to make, blockbusters. And one of the things I find fascinating about his 21st century work is he sort of like, after 1993 and that idea came where he wanted to make important stuff and blockbusters, the 21st century films, he sort of found a way to blend that in a way where he's making movies that are both like, Spielbergian blockbusters, but they also have a lot more on their mind than things he made in the past.
No, it's totally true. And I feel like it is interesting, like his, it is interesting to remember that year in 1993, because I recently dug up like a New York Times feature about him making Schindler's List. And the whole thesis of the feature was, wow, this is a really big swing for him. Like, this is a big challenge. Can he do it? And right. I mean, this is like 28 years ago. But yeah, there was a time when Steven Spielberg wasn't seen as the kind of filmmaker who could give you a Schindler's List or a Saving Private Ryan. He was considered just pure popcorn. And like you said, like he's definitely rebelling against that. But I feel like it is interesting too, that in his 21st century work, you are right. Like he is exploring bigger ideas, but it feels like sometimes it's not as successful as it could be. Like, I feel like, sometimes he's at his best when he is kind of just verging towards one direction or another, like where he's just really committed to, making something super serious like Lincoln, or he really is going all out there with Ready Player One.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like these two films in particular are like the films he tried the hardest to blend those two things. And then as the 21st century progressed, he sort of leveled out a little bit one way or another. But so AI, big deal. Not only is it, Spielberg's first 21st century movie, it's also Spielberg finishing something that Stanley Kubrick started. And, all the publicity around the movie played that up, that it was not just a Spielberg movie, it was also a Kubrick film. And I've always found that so fascinating because, Kubrick and Spielberg, both great filmmakers, but they're so different in that, Kubrick had, a love of sort of like an irony, a sadistic sort of irony, where he's okay with literally blowing up the entire world as a joke. And Spielberg is really like a humanist. He doesn't, he cares about humanity in a way I think Kubrick did not, and he loves a happy ending in ways that Kubrick did not. So these two filmmakers, blending their very different ideas together was looked at as both this, it's like a big deal, but it's also like, can this work? And I think it does. And I think it does because this is like, honestly, I find this to be Spielberg's like darkest like movie, like at least at the top of the list. Like this is darker even than Schindler's List in a lot of way, because after all the, the horrors of Schindler's List, there is like a hopeful ending there. And AI, even though some people think that ending is happy, it's really not that happy of an ending. I mean, honestly, it's not happy at all because David is alone after millions of years. Everyone is dead. There's no humans left. He gets his mom back for one day and then she's going to die again. That's a bleak ending.
Yeah. And I feel like the two things, I feel like the two things with the ending are, one, I remember it getting a lot of flack when it first came out about, this is Spielberg tacking on his happy ending to Stanley Kubrick's work, because Stanley Kubrick would never have had an ending like that. And the facts are, it is not a happy ending at all when you break it down. And also, I was lucky enough, there was this amazing exhibit of that traveled around for a couple years there of Kubrick's, Kubrick's work. Essentially, it was a museum show where you could, with all of his concept drawings, all of it, like script pages, all sorts of stuff. It was an amazing experience to go through it all. And it does include his concept art for AI. And the robots at the end were his idea. And the design, he had like the sketches align with a lot of what Spielberg did. It's very, it was Kubrick's ending in a lot of ways. And I mean, arguably, I think Spielberg maybe even made it darker.
Yeah, I would agree there. So what is your take on AI as a whole? Like, how do you feel about the film?
It is. I mean, it's such a weird movie in so many ways, in part because of the ending, which, I mean, I feel like I've heard interesting discussion about, like, well, if you just end the movie with him down below in the copter, frozen forever, like it's a very different movie. But it's essentially, a chase. It's a chase movie. If that's even an expression. And that's where the chase ends ultimately. I don't know. It's like I feel like as I've broken it down over the years, I find its flaws more fascinating than the stuff it does really well. But the stuff it does really well is so compelling. Like the first section where it's just basically, David in the house and getting into trouble is so elegantly done. And then you get out into the world and you see what kind of world this is, and it's kind of horrifying. And that section, I feel like, is not as elegant. Like, I feel it goes up and down a little bit, but it has so many great moments. Like, I don't know if AI is bigger than the sum of its parts, but so many of its parts are really cool.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's so much going on, especially in that second half of the film where they're like jumping from one crazy locale to the next. They have the Flesh Fair, and then they have Rouge City, which is like a neon future. I think it's supposed to be Atlantic City, basically, but in the future where there's insane stuff everywhere. And I've always loved how I don't want to say ambitious. That sounds like a dumb thing to apply to Steven Spielberg, but it really is like a big, ambitious movie. And I honestly can't imagine something like this even coming out like now. It just seems like, even though it's not that old, it seems like almost from like a really different era, basically. And but I love all the ideas that are in this movie. I love how like ultimately bleak it is. I mean, right from the jump, it has that Ben Kingsley narration where he's talking about like the polar ice caps melted and populations are down, and people aren't allowed to have a certain number of kids. And it's like right from the start, this movie is telling you that like everything is just really terrible. And things really don't get any better for David through this whole movie. Like, yeah, he makes like a friend, and yeah, he goes on an adventure, but he goes through hell through this movie. And that's sort of why I go back to the idea that I just think this is Spielberg's like darkest thing. Cause Spielberg, he loves kids. He loves getting, he loves putting kids in danger, but he also loves getting them out of that danger. And in this movie, David really never gets out of danger until like the final like 10 minutes. And even then it's like, well, that's it.
Well, and I think like I believe what we were supposed to interpret from the final moments of the film is that it's not, David dies. Like he shuts down forever. And I feel like the robots did a bad job of planning this, frankly. Not to critique the robots from millennia from now, but I feel like I mean they could have waited a little longer probably to figure out how to keep humans to recreate a human for longer. They could have. There are things they could have done differently. Like they could have found a way to keep David in stasis. I don't know. It just seems like just poor planning. But I mean, and I feel like it's almost a shame that we've gone this long talking about AI without talking about how incredibly good Jude Law is in this movie.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how great Jude Law is in this movie, because he's so good in this, just like dancing through the film. He's great.
Yeah, I forget. Like I forget what they said. Like his influence. Like there were specific things he was inspired by. Like maybe Fred Astaire was one.
I think that and like Gene Kelly and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Gene Kelly, and I feel like it's always an interesting touch when stuff set in the not too distant future like goes to the past, to find its touch points. Like it's not, Jude Law's and playing contemporary music from that time. He's not contemporary romantic music from that time. I'm trying to think of artists who are doing like love ballads in the year 2000 and failing. Yeah. But you get my point. Like,
oh yeah.
It's an interesting way to make it seem more classical.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this came at this time when Jude Law was in like everything, and they were, trying to make him this leading man. And he's a great actor, but Spielberg is like the one person I feel like, not the one person, but one of the few people who really knew how to use him really well. And he uses him so effectively in this movie, to the point where, when Jude Law vanishes through the film, through the ending, the movie like suffers a little bit because you miss his presence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing, I think I'm not the first person to have said this, but he is like a couple of other actors who, when they were younger were frankly very, very pretty, but are so much better as character actors. And, he definitely had like his big leading role moments in, the early 2000s, Cold Mountain, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, Alfie. But he was always so much more interesting when he was able to play somebody like Gigolo Joe. Oh
yeah, definitely. And Haley Joel Osment is another person in this movie who is so good, because, if you take a step back, you start to realize how layered and difficult his performance is. Like on the surface, it just looks like he's just, being sort of like slightly off kilter, but he's, I remember reading, and you can see in the movie how like there's never a scene where he blinks, and they don't call attention to that, but if you know to look out for it, you start to pick up on stuff like that. And especially like those early scenes where he's introduced before his, Monica, the mother character, does that imprinting on him. When she does that imprinting, he gets a little bit more human, but before that, he's like 100% robot, and it's so believable, which the way he nails that down.
Yeah, and I feel like what's really cool too is like one of the touches that makes this movie so compelling is when he comes across the improved David model, who's much more human, at the headquarters of the robotics company, and it's one of those things where you don't appreciate how good Haley Joel Osment has been in committing to this until you see him acting more like a human child, and you're like, oh, that's right, this is a really talented kid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then he smashes his counterpoint. I love that entire scene. That scene is so because again, like, not only is that a great moment to reveal like how good his performance is, but up until that scene, that character is David is just very, very timid, and even like he's just like constantly afraid. He's always like hiding behind Jude Law, and that's like the one moment where he like literally just like goes berserk, and it's scary to see this like very mild robot boy suddenly like lose his shit and just go insane.
You know what's funny is thinking about the Kubrickness of it all. Like, there's a lot of thinking about this movie as reconceived as a Kubrick comedy, like, which is it's not. It probably wouldn't have been a comedy if Kubrick had done it, but I think there would have been a bit more humor to it, and I feel like that scene where David smashes his counterparts, like, would have been so much darker. Or it would have been so much darker, but also played a bit for laughs. I don't know. Maybe that's a crazy theory I just came up with, but I don't know. It could be really interesting it's really interesting to imagine how Kubrick would have reapproached just the comedy aspects of it. Because that scene plays super straight and super serious here. And
oh yeah, definitely. And the few times where Spielberg tries to go for comedy in this movie, I don't think quite like work. Like, there's that flesh fair sequence, and there's like the Chris Rock robot, and that's even though I love that flesh fair scene for as horrifying it is, that the minute there's the Chris Rock robot, it immediately like takes me out of that entire scene, because it's like, oh, this is Chris Rock as a robot, and even as that robot's being killed, it's like making jokes. Like, that doesn't seem to fit with this scene.
Yeah, which is weird because, I mean, he goes back and forth on it, but Spielberg can be really good at comedy. Even like The Post has sequences that are, and maybe it's just because he stacks that cast with pretty much every actor who's been nominated for a comedy Emmy or who deserved to be nominated for a comedy Emmy in the last several years. But in Indiana Jones films are all full of great comedy moments. But yeah, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I feel like his was a 1941 PTSD kicks in, and
yeah. So after AI, we get in 2002 we get Minority Report, and that's Steven Spielberg's first real post 9/11 movie, and 9/11 is going to have, obviously it has an effect on everything and everyone in entertainment, but Spielberg, a lot of his 21st century films are dealing with that in some way, not just Minority Report, but also, War of the Worlds and Munich. And, he's looking, and even like The Terminal has elements of that, with airports and stuff like that. And it colors a lot of his work going forward. And I always found it so fascinating that, not to get like go off on like a political screed here, but after 9/11, there was a very big push for patriotism, and you're with us or against us. And Minority Report, he's immediately like criticizing a lot of the stuff the U.S. government would do and is still doing. Just surveillance and arresting people who haven't really committed crime and stuff like that. And I always thought that it's kind of even though Minority Report is, in a sense, a blockbuster, and it's a big action pick, and it stars Tom Cruise, it's Spielberg like almost immediately pushing back against these very controversial topics, and kind of hiding them in this sci-fi blockbuster. And that's, again, like what I just find so fascinating about his 21st century work, that he's willing to like take that sort of head on in a way that I feel like a lot of filmmakers at this time, especially big popcorn filmmakers, would not really want to do.
Well, it's interesting too, because looking at Wikipedia, apparently, like the film is really close to. I'm literally reading this off Wikipedia. Um, uh, it was the final script was completed on May 16th, 2001. So but it is, so it's only a few months before 9/11. But it is really a really interesting point you're making, that, and it almost like it does add to the political aspects of the film, this idea that, Spielberg is making this literally as all this is happening.
Oh yeah. And so Minority Report, it's much more fun than AI, even though it's also often very bleak and a dark portrait of the future. As great as AI is, I really love the set pieces Spielberg is pulling out in this movie. There's so many chases. There's that great scene where they're in like the car manufacturing warehouse, and there's like a fight inside the car as it's being built, and then Tom Cruise drives that car away. That's such a great moment. And that, the spider drone scene where he pulls the camera up above the rooms in this rundown apartment where Tom Cruise is at, and he goes from room to room. And like this, even though AI is a great movie, I feel like this movie Spielberg is having like more fun with what he's working with.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely and maybe in part it's because he's not trying to invoke in any way another filmmaker. Like, I think this is him like kind of swinging to the opposite of the spectrum and being like, yeah, I can have fun now, cut loose, but and also still have like really interesting ideas involved. Yeah, it is like a good set piece movie. Even like, something is like, when you break it down, the sequence where Tom Cruise and Angela walk through the mall, it's two people walk through a mall, but it's actually a really well done, thrilling sequence. And all the little prevision moments really add up to like one of the better escapes in what is a big escape movie.
Oh yeah, it has that great payoff where Samantha Morton's character tells him to grab an umbrella, and he doesn't know why. And then by the time they get outside, it's like pouring rain, and they disappear in like this sea of umbrellas. That whole sequence is so great. And both Tom Cruise and Samantha Morton are really good in this. I don't want to go into like a whole thing about Tom Cruise's personal life, but as out there as he can seem sometime, and as often as he seems to be playing the same character sometimes, when he's working with like really good filmmakers, he really can knock it out of the park, and he's doing a lot of really cool work in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the really interesting thing about Tom Cruise's career, I've always found, is that there was that period in the 90s and the late 2000s, and actually even before then, like he started off his career like The Color of Money is one of his first movies, right?
Yeah.
And that's Martin Scorsese, but he always had a real interest in working with important, interesting filmmakers. And that's tapered off over recent years. Like, I like Christopher McQuarrie's work on the Mission Impossible films quite a bit, but I do miss the era when it was just like crazy director picks coming in and doing their own thing with the material. And it just seems in general like Tom Cruise has stopped being interested in like the bolder director choices. And he's kind of like comfortable working with people who it seems like he can maybe boss around a little more.
I mean, yeah, I think you're right there. And yeah, that period is such a fascinating Cruise period. And this is like right smack in the middle of it. And it's always so interesting to me that this was the first time he and Spielberg had worked together. Like, you would have thought that would have happened before. And they worked together, again with War of the Worlds, and they really haven't done much together since. And I almost want him to like go back and do another Spielberg movie just to like so he can give us something different for a change.
That'd be interesting. I bet like Spielberg could push him into something into a new kind of persona.
Yeah.
Like going from Top Gun to Mission Impossible is not like, exactly boundary pushing.
Yeah, in a way, he's like going backwards. Really, he's like degressing. But he's really good in this because he's not just playing Tom Cruise action hero. He's a flawed guy. He's a drug addict, and he feels guilty that he lost his son, and he's divorced, and he's just a kind of a miserable guy in general. Like, all he lives for is his work, and as fate would have it, his work ends up turning against him and gets him in trouble. And as great as he is, Samantha Morton is really like the MVP of this movie. I mean, I feel like a lot of people in this movie are great, but she does this remarkable work in this movie, playing this like completely unique character who's unlike anyone else in the movie. She just stands completely on her own. And, that going back to that mall scene, like that's the first time that character has been out of her, flotation tank in so long. And she's just completely overwhelmed by the real world. And Samantha Morton just nails that so well, playing this very overwhelmed character, just trying to figure out what the hell is going on and dealing with everything while also being, psychic and knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, I called her Angela before, but her name, of course, is Agatha, because that was my mistake. The precogs are all named after mystery novelists. So it's the other two are Dashiell and Arthur, I believe. So not mystery novelists, just novelists in general.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, she's one of those actors who it really is a shame she hasn't gotten to do more exciting work, because she's so capable of it. And this came out right around the time she was in like a couple of other really great movies, like In America, where, which is another like, tough role that she totally nails.
Yeah. So what is your thought of this movie as a whole? Because I didn't ask that about this yet. I only asked about AI. Like, how do you feel about Minority Report?
I think it's a better ride. It's interesting to compare. This is another movie where the ending has been under so much debate for years. I feel like it's like in Wayne's World with the super mega happy ending, which is always funny. But it is. But I do also enjoy people who personally believe that everything that happens after he gets haloed is, of course, total fiction and just him dreaming in this fugue state.
Yeah, that's such an interesting theory, and it's an upsetting one, and it's hard for me to reconcile, because I feel like that would be somewhat more interesting than what we get, because I love this movie, except for I feel like it wraps up just way too neatly. I feel like the idea of, all right, we're going to shut down pre-crime. All right, he's going to go back with his wife, and she's going to get pregnant again, and the precogs are going to go live on this, beautiful secluded island. It's too nice. And, if you take into account that theory, it's not nice at all, but it's so hard for me to pick one of those two, because I feel like I'm not a big fan of it was all a dream endings. I feel like they're kind of a cheat. But at the same time, it's like, I wish it wasn't so neatly wrapped up here.
I mean, it is, I feel like Spielberg probably would tell you that, no, of course it's not a dream. That all really happened. Just stop overthinking it. It's a movie where Tom Cruise gets to escape an Alexis from a Lexus factory. Like, at the same time, like, it's a weird ending, just because, it's also a movie where, he's an addict, and, that's a factor that never gets really explored. Like, I can't imagine what happened in with his marriage that fell apart. Like, was she right to take him back? Like, there are a lot of questions about this guy.
Oh yeah. I will say one thing I do like about the ending is they never try to, solve the mystery of his son, like this, like appearing. Like, I do love that they leave that very like up in the air. Like, he never has really closure on that. And I do think that's a fascinating choice, that Spielberg like fought against his happy ending instinct to be like, all right, here's what happened to the son. And I do appreciate that, at least. Yeah.
But the touch of his wife now being pregnant again, I mean, I totally agree with you, that if the film had included, a resolution as to what happened to the kid, it would have been worse for it. But yeah, God, it's okay. He has a replacement baby. Still sticks with me a little bit there.
No, I definitely agree there. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You are the first official guest on the show. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and all that stuff again?
Sure. I'm at Lizlet on Twitter. I probably spend too much time on Twitter, but I like it. It's a nice way to connect with people if you have good blocking features. And then you can find basically links to all my work at lizshannonmiller.com. And who knows? I'm the fun thing about freelancing is that basically my friends tell me, "Oh, I'll be on some website and just randomly reading an article, and I'll find out it's you that wrote it." It's like I'm like a delightful Easter egg hunt for the internet. You never know where I'll turn up.
That's great. So new episodes of 21st Century Spielberg are published twice a month. You can also read about the topics covered here on slashfilm.com. You can subscribe to 21st Century Spielberg on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, and all those other podcast sites. Please, out there, rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. All that stuff. I'm Chris Evangelista. You can find me on Twitter at CEvangelista413 or on the podcast's official Twitter, Spielberg2K. Thanks.